All right, welcome back to We the Future. I'm Bryce Wheeler, and we are joined with Micah Kunkle. Micah, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Of
Appreciate it.
course. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of it. So, some of the viewers might know who you are, at least if they're paying attention on social media and a couple other sites. But tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into just being a voice out there in politics and religion.
Yeah, so you might have seen me on the Jubilee videos. I've participated in their debate series called Surrounded. I was in the very first one they ever filmed with Dean Withers, and I actually got to meet Charlie Kirk that day. That was really cool.
Cool.
Um, but yeah, so that's probably where you recognize me. A little bit about my background. I've been born and raised as a Christian, evangelical Christian, and my dad is an apologist, and so I was always raised with thinking about evidence and critical thinking skills. And then my mom's also a poli-sci major. She's always loved politics. And so kind of both of their perspectives have influenced me. So I love both the theological and philosophical, but then also the politics and engaging in politics and culture in our day. And I think that as Christians, we're called to do that. And so that's a little bit about my background. And so, yeah, I've just participated in debate. Oh, and then I did speech and debate for 4 years. And that really helped kickstart me into learning how to debate and really finding a love for engaging in debate and conversation. And so, yeah, all those things kind of played a role and influence leading up to the Jubilee video.
There you go. So how
Yeah.
did you, I mean, explain for some of the viewers and maybe even myself too, explain an apologist, right? Explain
Mhm.
a little bit about your dad and his views and a little bit more, I guess, in terms of what that is.
Yeah. So, apologist or apologetics, it just comes from the Greek word apologia, and Peter uses this in First Peter 3:15, where he talks about always being ready to give a defense. That word defense is apologia, and so that's where we get um, the term apologetics. And so apologetics is just simply defense, or the defense of the faith when it comes to Christianity. And so yeah, so my dad, when I was about 2 or 3 years old, joined with a ministry called Stand to Reason. And basically, he saw a huge need in the next generation of actually learning how to defend their faith. And back then, it was kind of new atheism as a big threat to the church. I'd say it probably has changed a little bit since then, but then in 2017 he started his own ministry, and basically it was a family affair with that, and so we all helped out and participated, and now I actually work there part time and handle a lot of their video and social media stuff. Um, and so, yeah, so that's just simply what apologetics is defending the faith, making arguments, giving good reasons for the hope that we have.
Yeah, which I mean, that's how I came across you is from your Jubilee appearances. Which I mean,
Awesome.
I searched the platform. I found you on there at least what I found 4 times. You've probably been on there a couple more.
Yeah.
But you had obviously discussions with, like you mentioned, you had Dean Withers, you had Tim Miller, a couple other people that you had discussions with. And what I was impressed by was, yeah, your ability to not only come at it with a logical standpoint, but just the evidence to back your claims, and even the evidence that you called them out for not having, right? So, yeah, walk us through. I mean, obviously, listeners can go and take a look at those episodes that you've been in, but which was your favorite episode that you or conversation that you were a part of, and what did you get from that experience?
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, this most recent one I was in, the Tim Miller one, was my favorite one. And I think as I've done the Jubilee videos more, the nerves have gone away completely. And like I found this with when I participated in speech and debate in high school, like the more I did those debates, the nerves would go away. And by senior year, I didn't have many nerves at all. Um, and so I found the same thing with the Jubilee debates. Now I'm familiar with the format and how everything works, and I know what to expect. And so I've gotten a lot more comfortable. And I think probably the Tim Miller one was probably my best performance, I think, so far. And so I really enjoyed that. I really enjoy being picked at the very end, because then I can choose a topic that I'm really passionate about, that I, know well and want to debate. And so I got picked by Dean early on, and that was really cool. We got to have an abortion debate, and then Tim picked me. And so I got to have an abortion debate with him as well, which was really awesome. And so, yeah, I think this last one with Tim, and I think Tim, for, as much as like there were some interruptions and things like that, Tim was definitely the most respectful person
Yeah,
that I
I would
debated
agree with you.
against. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of it as well.
Good. So
Yeah.
walk us through. I mean, I come from a Christian background
Hmm.
and man of faith myself, and I kind of have the very similar views that you expressed on that episode with Tim in terms of your evidence or your ideas behind abortion. But walk us through a little bit of that. Why do you feel that that's such a growing problem? Because I would agree with you. It's such a growing problem that we see in our not only our generation, but in our country, state level. But what do you think is kind of the main reason why we're seeing more and more people flock to the idea of, pro-choice versus pro-life?
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge issue, and part of that conversation is trying to illustrate how big of an issue it is for some people, um, and to like actually wake them up to what the implications of what they're saying if they're wrong, right? And so that's kind of what I tried to do or did at the very end with Tim, um, of telling him like, hey, like 1/3 of my generation is gone because of abortion. And, you know, if pro-lifers are correct, like this is one of the greatest moral tragedies, actually probably the greatest moral tragedy uh, of all of human history. And so um, it's something that definitely requires a lot of careful thought. Um, and you know, I think if you look, especially like at Gen Z and kind of how the demographics are playing out, I think you're starting to see a split in Gen Z. Like they're either very conservative or very liberal. Um, and so like why are people, it's like especially like my generation, kind of attracted to the pro-choice movement? I mean, I think ultimately it comes down to sex and basically using abortion as birth control. I think that's a huge reason why. And um, I think there also is a lot of pressure too of, if you have this kid, a lot of people will say your life is going to be ruined and, all this stuff, and you're going to regret it and things like that. And I think a lot of times women are pressured into it, based off of, things like that. And so, yeah, I think there's multiple different reasons. I think just people aren't aware really of what is actually happening when an abortion happens. They're not they haven't actually really thought about it very deeply, and so then you introduce them to, like, hey, this is what, you know, an abortion actually looks like, and it's tearing the baby limb from limb out of the mother, and it's crushing its skull hole and different things like that. um then I think it kind of awakes people's moral senses when that happens. And so I think there's a lot of different reasons for why someone might be pro-choice. But as far as like logically how the arguments go, I find a lot of the arguments very, very weak and not very substantive, especially when it comes like philosophically down to a lot of the arguments that they have.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think one that we see a lot, and you've probably run into it with people when you had these kind of discussions, is they'll have the idea of, okay, well, what about rape or incest situations
Mm,
and situations
yeah.
where they run into that. And I don't remember exactly where I saw it, but some medical doctor who was performing abortions for most of his professional career, he said that it's a very, very small percentage of abortions that he actually performed were in cases of rape and incest. But I would agree with you. I think we're seeing a lot of the younger generation try to get around I mean, call what it is, the consequences from their actions. And so where do you feel like maybe specifically with abortion or just in general, where do you feel like that's stemming from, this idea of I'd love to just live my life freely without any consequence, without any risk, and if there is any risk or consequence that comes, I'll get to it when I get to it, kind of a laissez-faire style of
hmm
looking at it. Where do you feel like that comes from with younger generation?
Yeah, well, I think we have just adopted in our culture just kind of this like postmodern relativism type worldview. And I think even Christians have adopted it in certain areas, um, to where, it's just like, hey, kind of live your own life, you do you type thing. Like, hey, I don't believe that, but you can believe it as long as it makes you happy, type idea. And so that's kind of like the philosophy that undergirds a lot of these people's thinking about things. And it's the same when it comes to, morality. And I get these comments all the time on my videos of like, hey, if you don't want abortion, then don't have one, but don't restrict a woman's choice to. And that's a very relativistic way of thinking about the issue. Um, because ultimately, and I mean, for those of you who don't know or aren't familiar with relativism or postmodernism, it's just essentially this idea that morality or even truth itself is just subjective, that it's dependent on the person and not some sort of objective reality. And so when it comes to, yeah, like abortion, a lot of people will think, well, yeah, it's up to me. I'm the subject. Morality is dependent on you, and so you decide what is moral and what's not moral. And so, if you want to decide abortion is immoral, that's okay. That's totally your choice, but you can't interfere with my choice as well. And so that's kind of where I think this idea is coming from.
Yeah. What do you think would be your solution for all of this? Obviously, there's the arguments that is, you
hmm
know, it should be a national level decision. It should be, obviously, we saw that with Roe versus Wade, or it should
Yeah.
be a statewide, policy, which I am for. I think it should be state by state in the sense of, that's the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, those all stem back to giving more power to the individual states than the federal government. But for you, you hear arguments on this, and you've probably talked about it a lot more than I have. What do you think would be and maybe not it's a one size fit all solution, but what do you think kind of stems or would narrow down to a solution?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely engaging in public debate is obviously something that I think helps and is super important, which is why I do engage in the Jubilee videos and engage in debate whenever I'm asked. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think like it's about making it relevant to people as much as you possibly can. And so whether that's through like rhetoric of like, yeah, 1/3 of my generation is gone, or like these millions of people are dead, if I'm correct, or whether it's through like just attacking that relativistic foundation. Because of course people will want to say like once you make it personal to them, they'll want to say that, yeah, of course, their morals are the objectively right morals. And so, um, you know, if it comes down to like, hey, like, okay, can I just like steal your wallet? Can I just take that from you? A lot of people are like, well, no, I think that's wrong. It's like, okay, well, yeah, because now it's affecting you. And
Personal,
so
yeah.
showing how that's not consistent. I think like the ultimate like goal and for me is to get abortion on the national level banned, because it's a fundamental human right, which is life, that is being attacked. And so that seems something that I think the federal government does have a very vested interest in protecting. But
Sure. Yeah.
um in the meantime, of course, I think pursuing um, different state legislation to completely ban or limit abortion as much as we possibly can is appropriate measures.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I think starting on a state level, I think that's the only way it can start, and then
Yeah.
working your way to federal. Because yeah, I would agree with you. Then it's a fundamental right that humans have, and if you make it a human right issue, then obviously that's when it should be on a national level. Kind of pivoting, not changing subjects too much, but you mentioned that during the Jubilee videos, you had the chance to meet Charlie Kirk. Walk us through that experience. Obviously, there's a lot of young Americans who are waking up. I mean, I've
Yeah.
been a Charlie Kirk fan for years, and his assassination occurred at UVU. I saw you visited there, and that's
Hmm.
about an hour away from where I currently live here in Utah. So walk us through that
Oh, wow.
experience, what it was like, and what he meant to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had known about Turning Point for a long time, and about their conferences. And I haven't attended, and actually this week I will be going to AmFest.
There you go.
And so if any of you guys out there are watching or at AmFest, and you see me, make sure you come say hi. But yeah, so then on social media, again, I love debate, and so Charlie Kirk was someone that was doing that, and was doing debates on college campuses, and so I was definitely keeping up with him, and would listen to his podcast every once in a while, and so then yeah, when so the Jubilee video, they filmed the Dean Withers one first, even though they released it second. They filmed that one first, and they filmed it in the morning. And it was from about like 8 to 2, and then afterwards they had several of us stay back to do different interviews, to put a few clips from the interviews at the end of the video. And so I was one person that stayed back for an interview because I was chosen at the end. And then afterwards, me and Dean were talking, and we had some good conversation. And then we noticed a car pulling up, and we were actually, me and a few other of the Republicans there, were actually about to leave. And we noticed a car pull up, and we saw Charlie Kirk through the window, and we were like, oh my gosh, it's Charlie Kirk. Like, okay, we got to stay and see if we can meet
Cool.
him. So, we stayed, and then, his assistants came out, and, we were like, "Could we meet Charlie Kirk?" And he's like, "Yeah, he's on a personal phone call right now, but afterwards he'd love to meet you guys." So then we met with him, and we were just talking politics, and then he was asking us like different tips and advice on the Jubilee video and how everything worked out, because again, it was a new series, no one had done
Yeah.
it before, and so he wasn't really quite sure what to expect with it. And so we were talking, Dean was talking with him as well. And then I'll never forget this moment. The liberals started showing up and started walking in, and Charlie Kirk paused the conversation and he was like, "Now I just want to point out, notice how the liberals are dressed versus how the conservatives are dressed." And he was like, "I'm not saying they're dressed badly,
Yeah.
but it's interesting how politics have also become aesthetics." And I was like,
Yes.
"That's a really interesting point." And I mean, I think largely it's true. But um, so then, yeah, then the Jubilee producers finally grabbed him, and then kicked us out.
Took
And
him away.
so yeah, and then he did his Jubilee video. So yeah, it was a really cool experience. I'm happy to meet him and grab a selfie with him. That was really cool. And then so yeah, and then after that, I've been following him pretty closely, watching his debates and watching his videos. And so yeah, I was very sad at learning of his passing and his assassination.
For sure. Yeah. I think there's a lot of tons of people who were saddened by it. Why do you feel like Charlie Kirk had such a I mean, he has, and the argument can be made, he still has such a profound impact on, younger generations, our generation. Why do
Yeah.
you feel like that's the case with somebody like him?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was a very likable guy. He's a very likable guy, very nice guy, and I think he engaged in debate respectfully, and that was a huge thing for a lot of people. It didn't feel like he was engaging in shouting matches or anything like that. Um, that no, he actually engaged in debate, and that he actually cared. Like, yeah, I think that really comes across in a lot of his debates, that he actually really does care about the other person that he's debating, and wants the best for them. And so I think that came across in his videos, just the care that he had, the respect that he had. But he also didn't just, have care and respect, but he also brought facts, and he brought good logical arguments and good evidence. And that's a huge thing for people, is not just the feelings that you get, but also the like hard evidence, and like, do you actually have arguments to back up what you're saying? And so I think Charlie Kirk did a good job of both of those things. And I think that's why a lot of young people loved him, and he would interact with young people. I think sometimes we have this view that young people just aren't as smart, or they're kind of dumb, and and so they still have a lot to learn. And of course, I do have a lot to learn. Um, that is almost used as an excuse to either like dumb things down or to not engage with younger people. And um, Charlie didn't believe that at all. And
Yeah,
Charlie, engaged with young people on purpose. And I think, and he really, raised the expectation for young people. And so I think a lot of us respected him for that as well.
for sure. Yeah. I mean, he was somebody who, like you said, debated in such a prolific way that it was, respectful, but also very fact based. But yeah, I would agree with you. I think that's something where, whatever the legacy of Charlie Kirk ends up being, because obviously there will be a legacy. I think that's the one thing he will be known for, is the fact that the younger generation he really played into the idea and the truth, which is, we're going to be the ones that are going to eventually take over this country and this nation and the politics and, in various different professions. But, finding a voice sooner rather than later, I think was his biggest point with the younger generation is you got to become involved now, even if it's
Yeah.
just you're knowledgeable on subjects and you're not out there like you and I, putting ourselves in the limelight and doing things like this. Regardless
Yeah.
of that, as long as you're being educated, I think that's the most important thing that he professed. So what's your take with everything going on right now? We've talked about it a couple times on the show. What's happening right now between, with the organization of Turning Point USA? We can
Hmm.
start there. What do you feel like is kind of the next steps for Turning Point? You're obviously going to the event this week at AmFest, but
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to tell, it really is. You know, I love Erica. I think she's an amazing woman, and the fact that she's able to forgive Tyler Robinson was incredible. That was an incredible moment at the memorial,
yeah, agreed.
which I was privileged to be able to attend, and so
Okay, you were
um,
there. That's cool.
yeah, it was incredible experience. But I don't know if she is the future of Turning Point. I think I want her to always play a role in that, but as far as like who is the leader, I'm not quite sure. So we'll see. Definitely part of Turning Point's mission has got to be, continuing what Charlie did produce in his lifetime, continuing to spread that and post that and repost that and things like that. And so um yeah, but I don't know. It'd be it's a tough position to be in.
It is.
And it's that's part of why it's so tragic is because he was so young, and obviously when you're that young and you have that organization, you aren't necessarily thinking about, okay, who's going to take over
Yeah, the natural.
when I die, yeah, like who's naturally going to be who step up. And so yeah, I don't know if it's someone within Turning Point, but as far as like outside of Turning Point, um who's going to you know, lead the conservative movement. It's kind of interesting. We're kind of having a conservative
We are, yeah.
Republican civil war right now,
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
over that. And so it'll be interesting to see who kind of wins that, or whether
Yeah.
we stay divided.
Yeah, and I would love to ask you too, because and my perspective completely or could be completely different than yours. There's,
Mhm.
like you said, I think that's a beautiful way to put it. Beautiful but scary way to put it. There's a huge divide right now happening in the Republican base, and there's people out there. I mean, you probably scroll through your social media feed, and it may look different than mine, but people out there saying, the whole reason why we're going through this is because of what happened to Charlie Kirk, his assassination, and people like Candace Owens that are investigating or trying to find answers, or other people like there's obviously the Nick Fuentes, who's out there, you
Yeah.
know some people might argue, who took over the views, or not views, but took over for Charlie Kirk because of such a big mass following that he has. But what do you feel like is the main reason why young conservatives, or just the conservative party, is looking or having this divide?
Yeah, I mean, I think partly it's because of the reaction to the left. And so the left kind of went, the Democrats kind of went full crazy over here with, their critical race theory, and basically, their critical theory villainizing, white people, and specifically white young men. And so I think what we're seeing is the reaction to that, which is kind of a pendulum swing, unfortunately, uh, which is the Nick Fuentes crowd. So I'm very much a believer in the horseshoe theory, that there's kind of the extremists you have up on top, and they actually agree a whole lot on a lot of things. They're just on different sides, and they're actually closer together than they are to the more traditional conservatives or traditional liberals. So yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing that divide because just a full out reaction to the left, which I totally understand. Like, I'm a young white male, and so I totally get that.
You already
I
have enough.
totally,
You already have a big enough target on yourself.
yeah, I
As would
totally
I, right?
understand.
Same
Yeah,
situation.
yeah. So I totally get where they're coming from, but I think especially with Christianity as driving my worldview, um, you know, we're also called to follow the teachings of Jesus, and I don't think Nick Fuentes is following the teachings of Jesus.
I would agree with
It
you. Yeah,
in my opinion, it's really hard to watch a show of Nick Fuentes, just one show, and come across thinking, yeah, that's a Christian man. He's constantly cursing, constantly making crass jokes, constantly saying, some pretty, I would say, racist
I'd
uh,
agree. Yeah.
and misogynistic things that devalues women, and so yeah, and so, but that's kind of unfortunately the culture that we live in, that where the um you know our instinct is to go to the radical position and to fight fire with fire, and that's definitely, I think, why young men are drawn to that. And so I think what we need to do as a church, and as Christian men, is offer the alternative, the sort of the more middle ground of like, hey, like, you don't, there's not, it's not a dichotomy, right? You don't
Yeah.
have to choose this craziness or this craziness. There's actually a good middle, and that's biblical morality, biblical ethics, biblical sex ethics, biblical views on women that actually disagree with both sides here. Um, and so, I think that's kind of the way forward. But it can definitely be a little disheartening sometimes talking to my fellow Gen Zers.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think because one of the many reasons why I started this whole, I call it a passion project. It's growing into something a lot more. It obviously influential people like Charlie Kirk. I grew up, and I might be a few years older than you are. I'm 29, so I don't know what generation I'm a part of. I'll be honest, I forget quite often. So maybe you can help me
Yeah.
out. But I grew up listening to, Rush Limbaugh with my father. That's kind of where I really got into politics and started to develop a love for it. And then
Yeah.
that grew into kind of the natural succession into the Glenn Beck era, and then eventually into, the Charlie Kirk, time frame. Overall, all men of faith, where do you find solace, or what do you find to be the biggest thing that ties you back to your faith, especially in the
Mhm.
world that we live in with all the craziness that we experience?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's my local church. I mean, that's a huge influence on my life. And that keeps me rooted, in the faith of going to church every week, attending men's group and men's Bible study, and going through different books, and just having conversations with other men, and not just men my age, but it's men of all different generations and all different ages, because we all have different perspectives, and we can all be a help to one another. And talking to older men, and getting advice from them, and just hearing their uh, what they're going through in their life. Those things are all very helpful at bringing me back to Christ. And yeah, I can't emphasize what I think is the importance of attending a local church every single week. And because, I'll just be completely honest, very inconsistent with, my own personal Bible study and devotion. And it can definitely be a struggle, especially with life. Things come up and then you get out of the habit and then you've got to work really hard to get back into it. And so that's where having Sunday mornings on the calendar every morning, that is completely, sacred. Nothing touches that. Almost
Non-negotiable.
nothing touches. Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost a non-negotiable. Um, I think that's so important to have in someone's life, to keep you rooted and back in, um, God's word and God's truth.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that's, um, I would love to see. I mean, Tim Miller brought it up during your debate with him, where he mentioned that, we don't live in a Christian country anymore. We
Yeah.
don't have, those Christian values aren't really, I won't say noticeable, but they're not really right in your face as they were
Mm-hmm.
during the foundation of America. But I would
Yeah.
agree with you. I think that's the one thing that we have to have a more Christ-centered life. And if everybody lived that way, obviously we would see a lot of problems that we're experiencing or plaguing our society would go away.
Yeah.
But for you, and I think that's a great point, is, finding those non-negotiables and making sure that you're making time for, faith and the gospel and, God and Christ. I think that's super important. So I'm curious to get your perspective, because we recently had a Christmas party with a couple of our couple friends that we get together often. Yeah, always a fun time, Christmas holiday, and
Yeah.
that whole season. It's busy. I'm sure it is for you as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as natural, segregation happens, the women start to talk about something and the men start to talk about something. And we got
Yeah.
on the subject of, what do we do? We live in a world, we live in a
Mm-hmm.
country where, and here in Utah, we don't experience a lot of issues that might be, really big fundamental issues on the East Coast or West Coast or in bigger cities. But they asked me, because out of the three of us, I'm kind of the more political, outspoken because of this show. But their question was, what do we do? What's the advice, or where do we go from here? Obviously, we're not gonna, for lack of better terms, maybe it's too soon, from January 6th, storm the Capitol, take over our
Yeah.
republic, and make a huge difference or a huge change, root out evil from where it's hiding. But in your opinion, where's the place that we can at least start, especially as the younger generation who's coming to realize pretty soon we're going to have to be those older people that people look up to, and the ones that are in those, powerful positions? What's your advice, or what's your stance?
Yeah. I think you just start with who you know. And I think, there's only so much impact even someone like Charlie Kirk could have on people, that, the main way that people come to different opinions is through multiple conversations with different friends and family. And so, I think you have your own circle that, you can influence. And so I think a great starting point is starting with that group of people, starting with trying to influence that group of people, and, have good, productive, conversations and dialogues with them. But I mean, the next step I would say is, like, just get involved in, something, whether, that is a Turning Point USA chapter, and or whether that's like starting a Turning Point chapter or getting involved in your local one,
Yeah.
whether that's, getting involved in your local church and serving your local church. Um, I think serving and, volunteering and those things are so important and so good for people and for your soul. And so, um, find a nonprofit that, supports, something that you want, or supports the mission, um, that you support, and, get involved with it. Don't just like donate, but actually get involved within the ministry itself. And, because, yeah, it's hard to become like the next Charlie Kirk, or
Yeah,
to become like a Ben Shapiro or something, right?
yeah,
And so that shouldn't necessarily be your goal, right? If God
of course.
blesses you with that, that's amazing.
So
That's
be it. Yeah,
fantastic. But God has blessed you with friends and family that you can influence directly and that you can have conversations with. So start there.
yeah. No, I think that's a great place to start, and I mean, it's natural for people to start there.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be hard. It's not gonna be, okay, get your tripod, set up your camera, and, create a profile that you can talk about stuff like that. So I think that's a natural
Yeah.
place to go. So
Yeah.
that's great advice. I'm
Yeah.
curious to ask, and maybe not taking it right back to, but what we're seeing in America with, the divide of the Republican Party, or maybe not divide's the wrong choice of word, but kind of starting to see strain on that. Where do you feel like we go? Because I often find myself, and maybe it's because, we put out 3 shows a week, so I'm constantly trying to make sure that I'm, staying up to date with news and politics and what's, happening in our country and in the world. I find
Yeah.
myself naturally becoming a pessimist where everything's doom and gloom, everything's bad. My wife has to kind of bring me back down to earth every single day, like, hey,
Yeah.
hang out with us and the boys, hang out with the dog, do something to take your mind off of everything. But where do you think we go as, especially, young conservatives? There's obviously, like you said, gravitational pull to, you know, there's people out there like Nick Fuentes. There's people
Hmm.
out there that we had like Charlie Kirk, where I think a lot more people found peace with his views. Where do we go from here? What's in your mind, the natural path forward in maybe healing the the different, it, for lack of better term, the heartbreak that we're seeing with the Republican Party,
Hmm.
but where do we
Yeah.
go from here, in your opinion?
Yeah. I mean, I think one, it starts with viewing each other as image bearers, and we are made in God's image, and so we deserve respect. Everyone deserves respect, and I think how that plays into politics is giving people the benefit of the doubt, of saying, "Hey, you know what? Like, I I think this view has negative consequences, but I don't, and it may have evil consequences, but I don't think you're evil." And making that distinction, because oftentimes we can get, so caught up in the arguments, or so caught up kind of in our tribes, that we forget the fact that, oh, yeah, they're a human being. I need to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they may just be interpreting data differently than I am. And, um, that doesn't make them a bad person. That just makes them wrong, you know? And so I think starting with that, so that we can then have civil dialogues where we're actually promoting truth, where we're actually trying to pursue that together. And I think doing it the way Charlie did it, which is have conversations, do it in a respectful way. Don't assume the worst intentions. Um, Whether, it's sort of the pro-Israel side, don't assume that the other side is just all hate Jews, and they,
Yeah,
are all misogynistic. Even if they are espousing what you think are anti-Semitic or misogynistic views, it doesn't mean that they're purposefully trying to have hate in their heart for them. And it could very well be that if they were awakened to the consequences of their view, that they would say, okay, yeah, that's really bad. And then on the flip side, right, it's not assuming that everyone is a Mossad agent, or like
yes.
everyone, is part of the conspiracy, and that everyone's influenced by Jews or whatnot. Um, And it's also assuming that not everyone is dumb. Like, there are very smart people on both sides. Like, you got to admit that. You have to uh you have to think that, or otherwise your conversations with people are just going to be disrespectful and not helpful at all. And so, that's how we ultimately, heal this, I think. um but then, yeah, it's about letting truth win out after that, and letting the correct idea uh win out in, the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I think those are all it has to be that way, right? Everybody bring your best, and it's just like Charlie, right? Bring your best ideas. Let's put them in the public arena, right? On
Yeah.
our institutions at the university, where critical thinking is the entire existence of those universities, and let's
Yeah.
put them to the test. So now you mentioned something that I kind of wanted to bring up. And look, if you've ever listened to the show, which I don't expect you to have, I do talk a lot about it, especially in the most recent, what's happened since Charlie Kirk. But Israel seems to be a very hot topic,
Yeah.
especially among, young conservative individuals and people. And it's something that I've tried my best to look into, because I don't know about you, but I never really heard Israel. I knew where they were, I knew of them, but I didn't really
Mm-hmm.
hear much about them until after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. In
Mm.
my opinion, that's where, at least for me personally, the Israel in the media, social media, people talking about it, that's kind of where everything took off in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously there's a lot of people out there, like I said, younger people who are upset about the amount of impact or foreign aid that we give Israel, and then therefore the
Yeah.
impact and influence that they have here in our country. I know you talked about it on Jubilee. I can't remember which of the
With
with it.
Jank.
Yes, with Cenk.
Yes,
So
Jank Uger.
what's your opinion? And I know that's such a big, broad topic to ask you to, bring it into, one strain of thought, but kind of take it for what it's worth. What's your thoughts on
Mm-hmm.
what's happening right now?
Yeah. So I mean, just full up front, I've listened to Ben Shapiro for years, and so
Yeah,
that's always been an
so
important
have I.
topic to him.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I definitely the talks about Israel has definitely ramped up since Charlie Kirk's assassination. And with, like Candace Owen peddling these kind of conspiracy theories that, it was Israel that did it, and things like that. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think, so one, kind of addressing the more conspiracy theory type crowd. Um, I don't accept things if I don't have evidence for them. And so I don't accept things based off of, just suspicion, or just because they're not Christian. Like, I don't, like, that's not evidence that,
Not enough
therefore,
for you.
they're controlling the United States or anything like that. And so I just think that it just lacks so much credible evidence that it's just not even something that is even really very convincing at all to me. Now, as far as like foreign aid goes, I think that's more of there's decent reasons on both sides for that. And I think when it comes to that, it's about asking, like, okay, what's in America's best interests? And I think I've come to the conclusion that supporting Israel is within America's best interests, that they actually provide us with a lot of valuable intelligence. And they're also like the only like solid democracy in the Middle East. And so, and you talk to Christians that actually live in Israel, you even talk to Muslims who live in Israel, and they have a great life there, and they love living there. And so, I think it's important to have that beacon of democracy in a region that one, not only like for the most part hates Jews, but two, also hates Christians, and three, hates America. No, I mean, I think we've quickly forgotten 9/11 and the implications that that had. And, I understand there's controversy around the
Of course.
2003 Iraq War of whether we should have gone in and whatnot, and you can have that debate. But I think regardless of that, that should at least show that we need some sort of force and good force in that region to help fight back, what I would say are forces of evil,
Mhm.
that are terrorists. And, just like recently, in Australia, we had that unfortunate, mass shooting.
Yeah.
And it was done by radical, Islamists that, come from the Middle East. And so that's a huge to have an influence in that region. And so I totally think it's within the United States interest to have them as an ally, to support them, and to support their existence as a country.
Yeah, and I would agree with you to a point. I think, having allies is a good thing. I think it's something that every country, especially if you're going to be one that, is as big and has a big influence like the United States does. I kind of come from it from the side of I'd love to see way more, money being put back into America to benefit maybe a little bit more clearly American lives. And I think,
Yeah.
if we're going to support Israel and if we're going to provide, financial aid to them, I think that's something that if we feel is in the best interest, okay, go ahead and do it. I just think a lot of people right now are just kind of seeing how much money, right?
Yeah.
Tail end of last week, we've seen it again. A big bill comes up, and after being told by President Trump that you know the entire idea of I'm trying to remember exactly what he said, but how he's talking about the idea of affordability as a Democratic hoax and all of that. Do you need to take that?
I'm sorry. Yeah. Can I take that real
You're
quick?
good. Yeah, take it. You're good.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
It's
Don't
just a
apologize.
package.
Gotta love it. Time of the year.
Yep.
FedEx, UPS, and Amazon keeping them in business.
Yep. Yep.
So, no, but what I was going to ask you is, last week, for weeks, Trump has said, and the idea of affordability is a Democratic hoax, and it's super affordable right now to live in America. Which, speaking as a homeowner, father of two, trying to do a lot to keep things afloat, I don't really feel that it's affordable right now, especially any main difference between this current administration and the previous administration. Even though I may like the person who's in the White House a little bit more, but in your perspective, I'm curious too. Do you feel like the amount of aid that we're providing for Israel is at a sustainable level, or do you feel like there is an ability to maybe not pull out completely and pull back completely, but instead of sending, multiple hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe just tail it back or scale it back a little bit? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can, walk and kind of chew gum at the same time. I think that we can take care of American issues while also, taking care of foreign issues and foreign policy issues as well. And so I don't think those are necessarily mutually exclusive. Now, I get the frustration of like when Americans are struggling, and you're not dealing with those issues, and then you're doing foreign policy issues and you're giving money to other countries. Yeah, that can be very frustrating. And so, but I think the solution to that is just to figure out the American issues. And I mean, I think that honestly, like, you know, unfortunately, I think Trump probably overpromised on some of his things, and
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
especially in regards to the economy. And so, yeah, I don't think this message of, the economy is actually great. Like, you just need to look at the numbers, is really helping anyone. I think we all feel the affordability issue. And unfortunately, that is a direct result of COVID and of just the massive amounts of government spending we did because of that. And so, unfortunately, that's really hard to reverse, and we probably won't be, reversing that within the Trump administration. And so I think I'm a very traditional conservative. I don't think the answer is more government spending or more government money within the economy. I think the answer is free markets and unleashing the free market and deregulating and not putting tariffs. And that might be controversial within the MAGA crowd, but I'm not a big believer in tariffs. And lowering taxes. And I think all these things help, um, actually foster a healthy economy and help affordability and help people actually afford to live and eat and provide for their families. And so I think going back to that is the answer to some of these things. But yeah, I absolutely, I mean, there can be a good conversation about, like, hey, should we start pulling back funding with Israel, or like, should we have certain conditions with our funding with Israel? And I'm certainly like open, and I think a lot of people that are pro-Israel are open to having conversations like that of like, yeah, do we need to uh bring it back a little bit? But as far as like fully cutting it, I'm just not a fan of, because I do think they need our funding. I do think our funding helps them, and I think it's mutually beneficial to us.
Yeah.
But we do need to focus on, American issues. But I think our government's so big, I think we can do both things at once.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there. I think there's so many different things that have to be tackled, whether it's, here on the home front or, across the oceans and helping other countries. What's kind of your thoughts with, and I know you said, look, we talked about at the very beginning of this, you're somebody who likes hard evidence, who likes facts, you're somebody who's an apologist. Make sure all of that's in line before you ever maybe even consider sniffing an idea. What's your view or your take on the idea that, there's this MAGA movement that's dying and it's making way for the America First movement? Are you somebody that kind of, has an opinion on the MAGA movement kind of falling back and, by the wayside, or what do you feel like is happening right now, or maybe the future for the MAGA movement that we saw?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's definitely a part of the MAGA movement that was America First. But I mean, like, you look at what Nick Fuentes has said, and he said to not vote for Trump, right? And he's called that out. And so I don't know if those people are necessarily like hardcore MAGA. Like, I think hardcore MAGA is still hardcore MAGA. Um, but as far as like um, Israel, I think there is a little divide within MAGA of, what Israel and support for Israel, what that should look like. And so, yeah, I mean, I definitely do think there's a split, but, I think that's just the way of politics. It's what happens. Coalitions come together, coalitions split, they come back together, they split. And so, I think we see that a lot. And, ultimately that ends up changing, in the future, that changes how coalitions look like, and I think we just look at the Democratic Party as the main example here of like the Democratic Party back with Bill Clinton is a completely different party than it is right now.
Completely
Um,
unrecognizable.
yeah, it's almost unrecognizable, and that's because they've had splits, and then they've, you know, one side has conceded something or another, and now they're a new party. There's a new coalition there, and so yeah, what does worry me is that I just hope the Republican Party doesn't become like the Democratic Party in the sense of we embrace the radicals and then the radicals run the party, because
Yeah,
the Democratic Party is run by the radicals. Anybody that's moderate is almost essentially held hostage by their radicals. And I do not want that for the Republican Party. And I think
no, yeah,
ultimately we will lose elections if that happens. And so, yeah, that's definitely something that makes me nervous. Moving forward. But again, that's where we have to engage in debate, and we have to try to win people over with our ideas as much
for
as
sure.
possible.
Yeah. And if there is any moderate Democrats out there, they might find a little bit more agreement from the conservative side. I feel like you're
Hmm.
seeing that a lot more now. So yeah, no,
Oh yeah.
that's really, really good points. And I'm curious too. Now, there's arguments that can be made, and I might be someone that's completely different than you. I think the whole idea of being an apologist, that's something I need to look way more into. I think my wife would very much welcome that. But I'm somebody that I won't say I like conspiracy theories because, they're
Hmm.
fun and they're entertaining and it keeps me up at night and I lose sleep over it. I
Yeah.
think the reason why I like them so much is, at least in my lifetime, and I'm only a few years. I mean, how old are you? I didn't really ever ask you.
I'm 24.
Okay, so only a few years older than you, but I've seen a lot of the conspiracy theories that, people deem as theories kind
Hmm.
of grow and metastasize into actual truth, or, you see real things coming out or evidence that comes out that actually supports those theories that were deemed theories years prior. So I'm curious, with someone like you, with kind of the views that you have, is there any conspiracy theories out there? Maybe you don't have to call them that, but is there anything out there that you're like, you know what, I do think that this is true or has some validity to it? Or are you just kind of, until I see the facts, I'm not going to accept them?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially like popular conspiracy theories, they're not always like there's nothing true about them whatsoever, and they're just all full of lies. If that was the case, then I doubt that anyone would really believe it. Usually everything has some sort of kernel of truth in there, that I think is then twisted, and not giving the full picture. But um, I think there certainly are kernels of truth in conspiracy theories. But yeah, I mean, I think like the obviously like with the COVID stuff, I think that's where a lot of conservatives were like, well, no, this isn't really conspiracy theory. Like this is true. You're actively like changing not only the goalposts but like the data all the time. And it's like the what was touted as a conspiracy theory of like the origins of COVID, like actually have some credible evidence behind it. And so, um, yeah, I think COVID definitely woke a lot of people up to like, okay, yeah, you like there are conspiracy theories that are true. But yeah, I mean, kind of as you said, like I'm someone that's like, hey, until I see like good evidence for it, um, I'm not inclined to believe it. And so, yeah, when it comes to different theories on, Israel or like Charlie Kirk's assassination or something like that, there's not a lot of credible evidence for any of that right now. And so, I don't believe it. And, that's mainly my conversations with people that do believe those things. I just ask them, okay, what's the credible evidence for this? And show me it, and let me push back on it, and see if there's a better explanation for that. And let me really test that idea. I really want to test an idea before I'm willing to accept it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think, and like I've mentioned before, I've got friends of mine that, that's all we send each other is just kind of these conspiracy theories and,
Yeah.
call it evidence, call it just, like you said, twisting the kernel of truth. The
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I fall back on, or at least something that I try to fall back on, is this. I feel like there's been a lot of things that we've seen, not in our lifetime, but in America's history, examples and evidence and truth and facts really of government manipulation and government having its hand in things that it shouldn't have its hands in, and you know having blood on its hands, whether it's assassinations or other events that have taken place. So I kind of look at it, and this we can discuss it. I'm open to it. Is the Charlie Kirk assassination? For me, it's like, well, we've had our government play its have many different roles in other assassination attempts or assassinations.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of would lead somebody to now think, and this is kind of an argument going around right now, why all of a sudden would I ever believe that the CIA, the FBI, and the federal government will completely be honest with us in 2025 if they have a very long rap sheet or history of never being, truthful to us as an American people?
Yeah.
That's something that but I agree with you. I think, and you're not asking my opinion, but my opinion of this whole Erica Kirk and Candace Owens and the trying to find truth and ask questions, I think that's important. I think it's important, as Charlie Kirk did. You have to ask questions. That's what's going to keep us going as a society and actually lead to finding the truth. But
Yeah.
I do think that these are ploys or events that kind of try to strip our view of the world and just kind of help us to focus on, okay, what's happening with Candace Owens and Erica Kirk today, as other things and other events happen in behind the scenes that we're not really
Mm-hmm.
focusing on because we see stuff, right? So, but what kind of things have you seen yourself that help you maybe decipher, but just go, okay, I don't really want to feed into this, even if it might be tempting? What are kind of truths that you stand by? I know we've talked about a few of them that kind of help you not buy into a conspiracy theory, or at least look into it with critical thinking glasses.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think just starting off, like, yeah, I think there should probably be a conversation had of like, okay, how involved was the government actually in some of these assassinations and different things like that. And um just because they may have been involved in some sort of way doesn't mean that they were completely the
For sure.
masterminds behind it and things
Yeah.
like that. um and then I think also just like just kind of like learning basic logic and how arguments and syllogisms and logical fallacies work are really important, because you know just because the government was untrustworthy or was involved in this one, that doesn't actually mean that it was involved in the next one. That doesn't logically actually follow. And so you need more evidence than just, oh, the government was involved in this. You need more evidence to say, no, it was actually involved in this one as well. Now, what I will say is saying the point that the government was involved in these other things is certainly a reason to say, okay, we need to look into this, that we
Yeah.
shouldn't just take what they say, as full truth. But what doesn't follow is that what they're saying is a lie. That would be fallacious. That would be fallacious reasoning. And so, um, again, that's why I operate based off of evidence, because the evidence is the deciding factor of whether it actually happens. And so, with the Charlie Kirk assassination, I think it's also important to remember that we're only 3 months, out from that. And it's still an ongoing investigation. It's going to be an ongoing investigation for a long time. And like the FBI is obviously, and the government is obviously aware of all these theories. And because of their mainstream um, sort of appeal, they're going to be investigating every single thing because they want a guilty verdict at the trial, and I think we all do, right? It's if Tyler Robinson's is the killer, we all want a guilty verdict. And what's unfortunate about some of these conspiracy theories is that they could harm the jury pool. But the FBI, of course, is very aware of that. And so they're going to have prepared responses for all these different theories, and they're going to show decisive evidence of this. But I think we need to be aware of, like, it's an ongoing investigation. And so they actually are not entitled to show everything
Of
to
course.
us right now.
Yeah.
And so we've got to wait for the trial. We've got to wait to hear what they say. And, based off of just already some of the evidence they have provided that is publicly available, it does seem pretty confident. Like I'm pretty confident Tyler Robinson is the killer. That seems very backed up by all the evidence that they've given and all the evidence that's publicly available.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, as far as was there other people involved or something, that's investigation that's currently happening right now. But yeah, I think just studying, some logic of like, okay, what's a non sequitur, right? Because I see a lot of people making non sequitur arguments where the premises may be true, but the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's something that's, kept me rooted and not necessarily believing every conspiracy theory. Because I was trained to think logically. I was trained.
Yeah.
I took a formal logic class. I did debate. My parents did a very good job of teaching me how to think critically about things. And so,
Which
um,
really, it's important in the world we live in. So
yeah, it is.
power and kudos to your parents. And I'm with you. I hope, and just speaking on it, I hope that Tyler Robinson did kill Charlie Kirk, because some of the alternatives that are out there to him not being the killer are
Yeah,
pretty scary. Pretty,
yeah,
all right, I'm gonna take my family, we're gonna buy a plot of land in Montana and just hunker down, wait for the end of the world. So I
yeah,
agree with you there. I hope, and I agree too. There's, it's ongoing investigations. They're always going to have things that they can't, tell the public, because then the public eye will be completely, swayed one direction versus instead of
yes,
the idea of, you're innocent until proven guilty. I just hope that, yeah, at the end of the day, I think you and I would agree with this. Truth needs to prevail. I think that's the main hope, whether it's you're a Christianity or have a Christian background, or you're just somebody who has a really good way of critical thinking. We just want truth to prevail, especially in the
yes,
country that we live in, because,
yeah,
these are very difficult and trying times, and ones that, hey, we're here on earth. We've been held back for these generations for a specific reason. So
yeah.
I think it's all good points. So, well, I appreciate the time you've given us, and the ideas and the thoughts that you've portrayed. I think you've got your head on straight, which is always great to see. Other people out there that
Thanks.
have that going for them. But what are kind of, I like to ask these questions. What are kind of your goals, right? You spoke earlier, the next Charlie Kirk, it's going to be very difficult for that to happen. It kind of has to happen naturally, or else I think a lot
Yeah.
of people are going to see through the fog, or what's trying to be pulled over our heads. What are your
Yeah.
goals? What are kind of the next things that we can expect from you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really just open to what the Lord has for me, and so any doors that He opens, I'm gonna go through. Like, so for example, like Amfest, I wasn't necessarily planning on going. I didn't get a ticket early enough to when they sold out, but I applied for the media pass, and so I got the media pass, so I can actually film content there, which
Nice.
will be great. And so, yeah, I think it's just, following the Lord's direction. I have a passion for debate. And so I'm always going to try to be involved in debate in some sort of way. And I think for right now, it's about growing my business that, I am currently running, but also on the side as much as I possibly can, produce content and engage with people. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm very open to what God has in store for me, but I will continue to, speak out on issues that I think are important and produce content as often as I can. And, try to be an influence in a dark world, in a dark culture, and try to help people think more critically about these things, and hopefully persuade them to not just my side but to the Lord's side. And so yeah, those are kind of my plans for the future. But whether I get popular or not, I guess we'll see. It's all in the Lord's hands. So
Yeah.
I'm open to whatever He has for me.
Well, they always say, right, that the adage is true. If you make a plan, the Lord laughs at it, right? So
Yeah,
it's always up to Him. So, well, where can
yeah,
people find you? How can they support you? Obviously, if
yeah.
they're at Amfest this week, find you, see you, say hello, talk with you. But what are other ways that listeners can support you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on like basically any social media. If you just look up Micah Kunkle, Micahkunkle. So I've got Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook. You can find me on all of those. And then on YouTube, Micah Kunkle as well. And so yeah, I occasionally do some TikTok live stream debates, where I'll debate people on abortion. And so, yeah, as far as supporting me, just give me a follow, share my posts, like my stuff. That's always appreciated. And then I would say also you can check out my dad's organization that I work for, Maven. You can look at their website, maventruth.com. And on social media, it's We Are Maven. And so, yeah, so I'm getting involved with them, and I obviously work for them as well. So, as I mentioned, so yeah, those are
Perfect.
the two ways you can support me in what I'm doing.
Okay, love it. And I'll have you send those over to me. We'll have them linked in the description wherever
Yeah.
people are viewing or listening to this, so that way they can find you and your organization a little bit easier. But other than that, Micah, appreciate your time, appreciate what you're doing, what you stand for, and appreciate you coming on the episode today.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the conversation. It was a good
Of
one.
course. Happy to have you on. So, yeah, for those who listened in, obviously like and subscribe on our platforms. We'll tag Micah in all of these so that you can find his social media accounts a little bit easier. But as I always say, ending every episode, we are the future, and it's one that we'll build together. So hopefully you have a great week, and we will catch you next time. Okay, man.